All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Moynihan Report. I'm your host, Michael Moynihan. And, it's a couple weeks, was it 3 weeks since the assassination of Charlie Kirk. We've discussed it quite a bit. And we don't intend to discuss it again tonight, but we'll discuss something sort of related. The Jimmy Kimmel thing, we've discussed quite a bit too. We'll discuss something related to that also. But I wanted to discuss political violence. A lot of conversation about this and a lot of intensely stupid conversation about it. And as I've pointed out in this show before, if you're a listener, viewer, and on the other show that I do, The Fifth Column, I think all this bean counting about who does the most political violence or who is doing the most at the moment is kind of besides the point. I don't think it makes much of a difference, considering that, you can always have these waves where it's the far right or the far left going up and down in overtaking the other. I saw this headline the other day in Axios that said, oh, it's the far left. They're doing it. Well, that seems about right, considering all the stories we've seen recently. But I have not thought that to be the important point. In a nation of 340 or 50 million people, you're going to get nutcases of every variety. Notice at this horrible Mormon church attack, the attempt to decipher the politics of the perpetrator, who is seen wearing a MAGA shirt in a photo from 7 years ago. But, that again is irrelevant into figure out the actual motive, right? I mean, you have 70 million people who voted for Donald Trump. Every time one of them commits a crime, it's not in the service of Donald Trump or the MAGA ideology. And the same thing is true on the other side. I don't think there's much mystery about that. But we've been talking about Jimmy Kimmel, too, which is related to Charlie Kirk. Obviously, he got on his show. It said something quite stupid about, the people in MAGA desperately trying to say he's not one of ours. And the response was also dumb from the FCC and this attempt from Brendan Carr to lean on ABC and Disney and Sinclair, which doesn't need a lot of leaning on because they're a pretty conservative outfit, to punish Jimmy Kimmel for this. Jimmy Kimmel came back rather quickly, and he was on last night. I don't watch his show. It's not a political thing. I'm just not interested. If I miss Letterman, by the way. Do you remember The Man Under the Stairs and Chris Elliott, and when it was actually fun and interesting and super funny? By the way, Letterman got political later in his life, very political actually. But we all miss those shows because everybody became political. And somebody did a kind of outlay of all of Kimmel's political guests, and of Colbert's guests, and it's like 1,000 to 1 from one side. So nobody likes being shouted at. Nobody likes just the one side of politics. Masquerading is entertainment. If you turn on Fox or MSNBC, you know what you're getting. It's slightly different when you do it when you are turning on a talk show. But yesterday, he was back on the air. Not on all stations, because I think Sinclair and the other one have kept him off. He had Public Enemy on. You guys know who Public Enemy is, right? The great rap artists of the late 80s and early 90s. And I say that, by the way, honestly, because I actually really like Public Enemy, because I don't care about people's politics. I separate the art from the artist. And if I didn't, I would not like Public Enemy because they have crushingly stupid politics. But Jimmy Kimmel brought them on to do a 3-song set. It's kind of spanning their career. The ratings are back down. He got that big uptick from all the controversy. But this is a clip of Public Enemy playing last night on Jimmy Kimmel.
Their latest album is called Black Sky Over the Projects, Apartment 2025. Here to kick off our week of music in Brooklyn, Public Enemy.
Power. You got to fight the power. Fight the power. Let me just say, fight the power. Hey, we got to fight the power. There be. New York in the building, baby. Yeah. You got to fight the power. There be. Peace, y'all.
Why did I play that clip? What a weird thing to do. Play a little clip of Public Enemy. On Jimmy Kimmel from Brooklyn, by the way. I'm currently in Manhattan. You can see that water tower behind me. That is not one of those Zoom backgrounds. I'm in Lower Manhattan, and so that was just a few miles from me over in Brooklyn. Yeah, no interest in them. I just want to put up a screen grab here. This is from that performance, and you might notice something in it. It wasn't mentioned. That is Chuck D. And you'll notice on his shirt that he has an image that says "Free Mumia," H-Rap, which is a reference to the black nationalist H-Rap Brown, who's in prison, and R.I.P. Assata. All right, now we're getting to where we're going, right? Jimmy Kimmel the other day said that he doesn't think that the person who shot Charlie Kirk represented anyone, any ideology. Violence is not the solution. It isn't ever, et cetera. And you know the conversation we're having about political violence. We don't like political violence, and this is the whole Charlie Kirk thing, disavowed by Jimmy Kimmel. On Monday, he had a guest who had a shirt on that celebrated 3 people who have murdered cops for political reasons. Mumia Abu-Jamal in 1981 killed a cop called Danny Faulkner. I recommend you read 2 books about this. Maureen Faulkner, his widow, they were very young people, just married in 1981 when Mumia Abu-Jamal, and there's no real controversy about this, except for people always lie and say, oh, it's a setup, it's COINTELPRO. And as I've mentioned before, even Michael Moore in his book said, yeah, we should probably admit that Mumia killed that guy. His book, Maureen Faulkner's book, is quite good on this subject to tell you how all this unraveled. And there's a couple of other ones too, but mostly it's that kind of free Mumia stuff. H-Rap Brown is a little surprising to me. H-Rap Brown, it was in 2000, past his black nationalist heyday, in which 2 cops in Georgia were serving an arrest warrant on him. And they saw him drive by because there's no one at the house. They knocked on the door. He didn't answer. They saw him speed by, and they turned around to go serve him this slip of paper. That's all it would do, one hand to another. One of those cops was shot and killed. The other one was shot and wounded. Rap Brown was found from a trail of blood. They discharged their firearms at him. I think in Alabama, a few weeks later, a few days later, H-Rap Brown killed one of those cops. There's no doubt about this. And that is on his shirt. H-Rap Brown kills cops for political reasons, right? There's no surprise about this either. And the final one is the one I want to get to, which is Assata Shakur. Assata Shakur, you might recognize that name because it's sort of close to Tupac Shakur. Well, it is his godmother, someone in the Shakur family. None of them are related, by the way, but they just take these revolutionary names. Assata Shakur was also convicted of killing a cop in 1977, I believe the trial. I think the shooting was in 73 in New Jersey. Two New Jersey state troopers were shot. One named Werner Forrester was shot and killed. A young guy. It was absolutely, crushing testimony you can watch from his widow, filmed many, many years later about their son growing up without a dad and what that was like. You can imagine not very good. And another cop was shot during that, and he survived. Joanne Chesimard is what she was known at the time. She survived because she was shot too during that. But a myth grew up around this, despite the fact that she was convicted of murder, that she had her hands up and all this stuff. And we can get into that if any of you guys are interested, because I've done very, very deep dives in this. I've gone through the trial transcripts. I found something incredibly fascinating about this recently that no one else had discovered. And if you guys are interested in the intricacies of this case and how that myth of her with her hands up was started, we can get into that too. But Assata Shakur is a purveyor of political violence. I actually found she was a member of the Black Panthers briefly, and then to a far more aggressive and violent group called the Black Liberation Army. And what she did is pretty astonishing. And it does not start with this thing that happened. No one is talking about this. It's in none of the obituaries about this, because she's being eulogized all over the place. And we're going to look at that in one second. But if you look at what she had done prior to this, other shootings, she was shot once in 1971 during a robbery. The person she was trying to rob in a place called the Statler Hotel in New York shot her in the stomach. She threw a grenade at a police car in 1972. Blew up the cruiser, by the way, a frag grenade. Did not kill the 2 officers. She was involved in another shooting of 2 officers. Both of them were killed. Was she a lookout? Was she a gunman? There's a lot of controversy about this. You can find different sources that tell you different things. I don't want to say, even though she's dead, I don't want to say that I know that for sure. Because the Black Liberation Army, the stated goal of the BLA was to kill police officers. And if you think that I'm joking about this, the communique, the first communique, well, the communique in 1975 that I dug up this morning says our primary target are the police. So how the hell does Assata Shakur end up killing 2 cops in 1973 in the New Jersey Turnpike? She was apparently, according to her, going to Baltimore because she had a job down there as a barmaid or some ludicrous excuse. But she'd done it before. She had been involved in the shooting of cops before. She had been involved in robberies before. She had been involved in various other shootings before. She had been involved in the split between the Black Panthers, the West Coast Panthers, and the East Coast. By the way, the West Coast, East Coast thing didn't start with hip hop. It started with the Black Panthers. And that break is what created the BLA, which was the much, much more violent version of the already very violent Black Panthers. So anyway, that's what I look at this. This is Jimmy Kimmel saying, I disavow political violence. We should disavow political violence. Political violence is not something that is happening on the left. It's happening on the right, or it's happening on both, and it's more on the right. You've seen all these arguments. One of the things about that, the argument that I've made in response, that it doesn't matter and why those details, if it's 50 to 40, 40 to 60, this is some sort of, high school basketball scores. What matters is, do we accept it? Is there somebody on the right who is celebrating the deaths of people in the Minneapolis state legislature that are over there, celebrating the killing of, I don't know, who else would that be? Who's the right-wing version? Is there a folk hero that goes around and kills people, cops in this case, for Assata Shakur, and is celebrated? The issue with Assata Shakur is obviously there have been scholarships named after her in state universities. There have been dining halls named after her. She's required reading on a lot of college syllabi. Who also is a bit of a fan of hers and says something quite nice about her in his first book is Ta-Nehisi Coates. Ta-Nehisi Coates popped up on Ezra Klein's podcast this week in the New York Times. And this is what he said to Ezra.
And I think Charlie Kirk was a hate monger. I really need to say this over and over again. I have a politic that rejects violence, that rejects political violence. I take no joy in the killing of anyone, no matter what they said. But if you ask me what the truth of his life was, and the truth of his public life, I would have to tell you it's hate. I'd have to tell you it is the usage of hate and the harnessing of hate towards political ends.
Coates' most famous book, Between the World and Me, opens second or third chapter with a poem from Amari Baraka. Some of you might know him. He used to be called Leroy Jones. Amari Baraka is one of the most skilled anti-Semites of his generation. And he was the poet laureate of New Jersey, the place where Assata Shakur assisted in killing a police officer. That was taken away from him in 2002 because he wrote a poem called Someone Blew Up America, in which he accused the Jews of being involved in 9/11. This is a guy that Ta-Nehisi Coates doesn't like hate mongers. His father was a Black Panther. He spoke positively of Black Panthers, which was a violent political organization, whether you like their goals or not, because that's not the point, people. The point is not we expiate the sins because we like the goals by any means necessary. Coates' father, by the way, got into a bit of trouble recently because he was given an award and someone pointed out that his publishing imprint had just republished Tony Martin's book. Tony Martin, a very famous anti-Semitic professor at Wellesley. There's a good book about this, by the way, by Mary Lefkowitz. A book called The Jewish Onslaught. You can imagine what that book is about. He's also publishes Amri Baraka. He also published the very, very violent scumbag George Jackson, who was killed in a prison uprising in the 70s. He was a black radical who killed a bunch of prison guards before he was shot down himself. These are people that love political violence. Ta-Nehisi Coates suggests that he doesn't like political violence? Well, I mean, let's be consistent about these things. So my proposition here is rather simple, is that political violence is political violence. If you abhor political violence, and you can say that when you're denouncing Charlie Kirk, why on earth, and you don't like political extremism too, this is essentially what Coates is saying, why on earth associate yourself with some of these people? That's what I'm wondering. And I'm also wondering why it's okay for the media to handle the death of somebody like Assata Shakur in the way that they did. I'm going to pull up as an image from Instagram and from the Instagram account of Gabrielle Union, who is an actress. You probably know her. I think is she the wife of Dwayne Wade? Is somebody nod their head if if that's the case? I don't have I'm not in the studio. It's good to be in the studio. You have people nodding at you. Otherwise, you're a psychopath in a room talking to himself, which is sort of normal for me. But let's look at this image of Gabrielle Union's Instagram feed about Assata Shakur. Can we pull that up? Or can we not pull that up? Do you want me to explain it to you instead? It's much better if I explain. I'm very good at explaining Instagram posts when people fail to put them on the screen. It's just an image that says, Assata Shakur is welcome here. Keeping in mind, the one thing I didn't mention, I'm sure you guys know this, that Assata Shakur died in Cuba, where she escaped. So she escaped to Cuba. Why don't we say, can we pull up that DSA one? We have the DSA, or is that one not working? Is nothing working today? Because then that just really screws me up if none of these things are working. The DSA, every other file is correct form. Okay, let's look at the DSA. This is what the DSA tweeted about Assata Shakur. Well, apparently not. It's real fucking amateur hour here, isn't it? There we go. DSA, Democratic Socialists, rest in power, Assata Shakur. The American state brutally oppressed Assata and her Black Panther Party comrades. She was in the Black Liberation Army. The Cubans, yay, welcomed her and other Black revolutionaries with asylum, and their solidarity and loyalty allowed Assata to live out her days in Havana. By the way, I just want to say, she escaped from prison. That's how she ended up getting to Havana. I don't even know if that's better to end up in Cuba. Did she get punished in the end? Kind of, because she had to live in Cuba. The DSA, obviously associated with Zoran Mamdani, who's a member. He was asked about it today and about that post today, and he didn't answer the question. New York Post asked him, and he was like, well, I'm here to run for mayor, not just say, hey, by the way, killing cops is bad. All right, the next one I want to look at was the vaunted Chicago Teacher Union. The Chicago Teachers Union must be one of the most failed organizations in the history of modern pedagogy, because good Lord, this is another rest in power one from the Chicago Teachers Unions. And also to note, speaking of mayors, Brendan Johnson, the mayor of Chicago, who, someone correct me if I'm wrong about this, I think he has a 7% approval rating. Is that right? Is it 6 or 7%? I don't want to get it wrong, because Brendan needs all the points that he can get. Was asked to comment on this, and he did a bit of a rest in power thing too. Okay, so then the most important thing to me, and this is how we normalize political violence, when it's by our compadres, our comrades, and our compañeros. I just wanted to look at some of the headlines from some of the news stories about the death of Assata Shakur. This first one is from the New York Times. Assata Shakur dies at 78. Convicted revolutionary found refuge in Cuba. She was convicted of being a revolutionary. I would say convicted murderer. Am I wrong? I am being a pedantic, aren't I? Okay, this is Rolling Stone. This is what I do, people. I sit around looking at shit like this. Assata Shakur, convicted Black liberationist, and Tupac's godmother, dead at 78. Again, she was, in fact, a convicted murderer. All right, this is NPR from, I think, the WBZ in Chicago. Black liberation activist Assata Shakur has died at 78. Man, you really wouldn't know that she was a kind of psychotic, violent person. And so this is The Guardian. And I just wanted to put this one up there because I just love the phrasing of this stuff. This is from a while ago. It was before she died, 8 years ago. Assata Taught Me, which is a play about how fantastic she was. And you know that Assata Taught Me is a T-shirt that I used to see around people in Brooklyn all the time. And I wanted to make one that had a picture of Werner Forster, the policeman, that said, Assata shot me. But I thought that maybe would be in poor taste. But that one, let's go back to that Guardian one, because I like this one. This is from Gripping Lessons in Resistance. Resistance, again, is killing police officers. And I want to go back to one final one here from the New York Times. It's also one from probably 2 years ago. And this is a book review of the Shakur family. Everybody in the Shakur universe were quite violent, and all members of either the Panthers, the Black Liberation Army. This is, I found, amazing. Among those who shared the stage with Lumumba Shakur, who's one of these guys, Afeni, which is Tupac's mother, by the way, is Mutulu Shakur, a freedom fighter and acupuncturist who considered Lumumba an older brother. Freedom fighter and acupuncturist. Why is acupuncture important? You know what is more important, I would say, was the fact that Mutulu Shakur spent 40 years in prison for killing cops, including the first black policeman on the Nyack police force in Nyack, New York, 1981, the famous Brinks robbery. You know, what's his name? This shithead in San Francisco who got kicked out, Chesa Boudin. His parents, he was raised by two other terrorists, it was Bernardine Dohrn and Bill Ayers, because his parents were both in prison for life for the 1981 Brinks robbery. And so, who were the gunmen? Not his parents, by the way. Not that we know of, but Mutulu Shakur was the gunman. And he is described by the New York Times. If I sigh, can you hear it? If I sigh very breathily into the microphone, referred to as an acupuncturist. People, where do we go from here? That one was the one that blew my mind. I just happened upon that. So let's just get back to the point here. I wanted to actually play a clip of Assata Shakur. Apologies for the bad audio. It was made in Cuba. Nothing works in Cuba. If you bring an American camcorder in 1991, it becomes a Super 8 Bolex with no sound. So I'm going to play this clip of Assata Shakur giving an interview. She gave a handfuls of interviews, but she was first woman to be number one on the FBI's most wanted list, and there was $1 million ransom for her. You wouldn't know any of that if you read the press or saw Jimmy Kimmel on yesterday. But this is her giving one of her rare interviews, and an interesting clip. And it stops abruptly at the end. That's not my fault. It's the people who don't know what they're doing in Cuba. So let's look at this. Is that one died too? I think the Black Guerrilla Army is working against me tonight. I think Mutulu Shakur is doing this from his prison cell. All right, I guess we're not going to have that clip. What are we, 0 for 7? Good Lord. This is like watching the Red Sox last year. So like I'm batting 0 on a lot of this stuff. The clip is, I don't even remember what the clip is, but it's her being an idiot. One of the things I noticed, by the way, I spent, yesterday I was driving back from my Eastern Long Island compound. It's not a compound, by the way. It's very small. And I was listening to a recording of her from Cuba. And one of the things about it is I realized that the appeal of Assata Shakur is that, let's be honest, she was quite attractive. She was a very beautiful woman. And it's the violence. It's the beauty and the violence, much like the Panthers. It's the outfits. It's the leather caps. It's the cool outfits. Because I listened to her for an hour. And if you want to talk about somebody who is sort of monumentally unimpressive as an intellect, this is the person. I understand why she picked up the gun instead of the pen. She ultimately did pick up the pen, by the way, and I was reading her memoir, which I had read previously, and I thought there was something wrong with my copy, because this is the thing that you get, right? When somebody is radical like this. In the copy of her book, she never mentions, by the way, which offended me deeply, the name of the police officer who was murdered that night. I believe she assisted in murdering him. I didn't think she pulled that fatal shot, but she shot another cop, and she had been involved in other killings. Nobody's mentioned by name, but she doesn't capitalize New Jersey, which I thought was amazing, or United States, which is the great from her exile in Cuba, in which she talks about freedom and American freedom in a place where there hasn't been an election since 1959. There was a dictatorship before that, but this one especially bad. She spoke very carefully about Cuba because she would go to prison if she was outwardly opposing the Cuban regime, as so many people in Cuba have done. But if you want to look at those clips, you can look at them. I really wanted to show that only for the purpose of how deeply unimpressive she was, and about how the whole thing was a setup. But keep this in mind, by the way, with all of these radicals. Have you ever heard of any of them? Anyone saying, "Well, yeah, they did that one." It never happens. Like conspiracy theorists, they believe everyone. It's Huey Newton was innocent, right? Eldridge Cleaver was innocent. Bobby Seale was innocent. Mumia Abu-Jamal was innocent, according to Chuck D and the Jimmy Kimmel Show. H. Rap Brown is innocent, and Assata Shakur is innocent. One thing not pointed out before we go to our guest, and I'm very excited for our guest now. I want to point out one thing. She was brought up on charges and was in a courtroom 6 times before she was finally convicted of murder in the murder of Werner Forster. 6 times. And in this clip from Cuba, she says, they were going to get me. There was no way I was going to get a fair trial. I also want to point out that all of these radicals, the Panther 21, which is what created the Black Liberation Army, all of them were the charges were either dropped or they were acquitted. And the number of these things, finding someone that was arrested and put in jail for a very long time, it's very rare. It's mostly the 1981 Nyack Brinks robbery, which Bernardine Dohrn and Bill Ayers took Chesa Boudin from his parents because they went to prison for it. But it was very, very rare. And somebody who was involved in that robbery, and this is a true fact, and you can look it up and you'll find almost nothing about it, but it's absolutely shocking. One of the people involved in that, who is involved in the BLA, is now a professor at Columbia, a guy named Jamal Josephs. He changed his name, but involved in that murder and is now a professor at Columbia. Now, tell me how we normalize political violence. We normalize some of it. We don't normalize all of it. It's important for us not to normalize any of it, whether it's on the left or the right. I think this is a pretty straightforward thing. All right. Well, I'm quite lucky this evening to have somebody who I've long admired and somebody who knows these civil rights struggles from the ground. You've probably heard of Bob Woodson. If you haven't, I don't know where you've been hanging out, because you should. He's the founder and the president of the Woodson Center, and he's the editor, I think most recently, Bob will tell if that's wrong, A Pathway to American Renewal, Red, White, and Black, Volume 2. Bob's still just pumping these things out. Volume 2. Man is 88 years old. This is absolutely outrageous. You look better than me, and I'm 51. I think I'm 51. I don't even know. Thanks for being here, Bob. I appreciate it.
Delighted to be here as well.
So we were talking about the death of a rather odious individual, Joanne Chesimard, rechristened herself Assata Shakur, and all the glowing profiles. You were somebody who was on the ground during the civil rights movement. Give me a little sense of why Bob Woodson didn't navigate towards Black nationalism and towards, the Panthers and obviously these offshoots like the Black Liberation Army, et cetera. What did you think of those people at the time, and why did you stay far away from it?
Well, thanks for having me on. Well, first of all, I joined the movement to really address the needs of the least of these. Mm-hmm. I led demonstrations in Westchester, Pennsylvania. That's the home of Bayard Rustin. Mm-hmm.
By the way, I was going to point this out. Bayard Rustin wrote one of the great pieces in Commentary Magazine in the 1970s, giving a backhand to Black nationalism. And Bayard Rustin should always be recognized as one of the great and underappreciated leaders of the civil rights movement.
Exactly. And I met Dr. King through him, because people don't realize I was at 25, took over the leadership of the local human rights organization. And so I was leading, but something radicalized me. We first of all, I was against forced busing for integration. Mm-hmm. I believe that the opposite of segregation is desegregation, not integration.
Yeah.
So that got me in trouble with the existing leadership. All right. Because if you argue something is all black, is all bad, that's racism.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And so I debated this with Julius Chambers, who was a black Harvard lawyer before the New York Bar Association. And I said, Julius, if we have two situations, an all black school where there's a presence of educational excellence and school B where there's integrated but diminished, where should we send our children? He said B. I said, then there's no more debate. The other issue that separated me was I led a demonstration outside of Wyatt Laboratories, and on the picket line were hairdressers, barbers, just plain ordinary folks. And when they desegregated, they hired 9 black PhD chemists. When we approached them to join our movement, they said they got their jobs because they were qualified, not because of the sacrifices of the people. So I realized then that I was in the wrong movement. That many of the people who suffered and sacrificed most was not benefiting from the change, and it has not altered in the last 60 years. That there's a bait and switch game going on in the black, and where we use the demographics of those who are locked in these killing fields as the bait. And when the remedies arrive, it goes to the non-poor, particularly non-poor black middle class. And so we have created a commodity out of poor people. So once I realized that, I devoted my life to addressing the needs of the least of God's children, regardless of race. I realized the biggest divide in America back then, after we passed the civil rights laws, was not race, it was class.
Yeah. When you look back, I mean, you've written pretty extensively about how we look back on America's history, particularly the 1619 Project and some of the dubious history that's been employed to make those points. I started the show by sort of monologuing for probably a half an hour. Good Lord, that was way too long. Sorry, guys. About Assata Shakur and how the media has treated her as this great revolutionary figure. How do you see how that history has been metabolized by the current youth of America? I mean, there's an Assata Shakur room at CUNY. There is a scholarship named after various radicals, but nothing for Bayard Rustin and nothing for people like you or Tom Sowell. How did that happen that ultimately your side won out, but intellectually it seems that your side sort of lost?
No, and for one thing, I believe that those on the left, that many of our leaders, the civil rights movement morphed into a race grievance industry. Mm-hmm. Also, many of them became black elected officials, and they were in office at a time when the country was spending $22 trillion on poverty programs. So that was, and 70 cents of every one of these dollars didn't go to the poor, but it goes to those who serve the poor, who ask which problems are fundable, not which are solvable. So you had a confluence of issues occurring here. Moving from civil rights to black elected officials, they were put in charge of the poverty programs. So they were advancing their interest, but they used race as both a shield and a sword. Mm-hmm. A shield against any criticism of this assault on poor blacks or a misuse of poor blacks, and a spear against anyone who dare challenge them. And the liberal media, the very fact that you're talking about funding, Abraham Kendi at Boston University can raise $50 million in 5 years to do anti-racist research. And after 5 years, a staff of 24 people, not a single piece of research comes out. Harvard gets $100 million to do studies on slave ownership of its founders. And so liberals seem to be, they're willing to invest in these horrendous actions, and conservatives are not.
Mm.
know,
Yeah, the Kendi. I don't think the Kendi. Not only didn't they produce any research,
no,
they
no, he didn't produce any. The point
none. Yeah,
is,
yeah, yeah.
but the left, they are willing to invest in these clowns.
Yeah.
They're
I
really,
read I
and
read Kendi's book, Stamped from the Beginning, fairly recently, and I was totally shocked because it won the National Book Critics Circle Award. That there wasn't any actually original research in it. It was all just cannibalized from other people. He doesn't seem to know how to do that. But the money is actually kind of people are wondering where the money went to.
right, but also Nicole Hannah Jones with 1619. That's what, since they've assembled these black journalists to write this attack on the values of the nation, this false narrative. We believe that since the messengers were black, that we should be a black response. That's why I organized my scholars, and we wrote. We didn't want to offer a counter argument. We wanted to offer a counter narrative that was inspirational and aspirational, that celebrates, that first of all acknowledge that slavery and Jim Crow, America's birth defect. Mm-hmm. But no, none of us should be defined by the worst of what we used to be in the past.
Yeah.
And also, so what we did in our books, we talked about how that slavery and Jim Crow are just part of the story. I call these crucifixionists. We are resurrectionists.
How far have you been doing? Okay, in the resurrection, have you managed?
Yes, the thing sold out in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
We've developed, but again, Nicole Hannah Jones gets a Pulitzer. Thousands of liberal foundations showed up to put money to develop curriculum. There was an ad at the Super Bowl for 1619. That's how generously the left funds its propaganda.
Yeah, that's right. There was, because there was a documentary version of it, and also a documentary version, I think, of Ibram X. Kendi's book on Netflix. I mean, you tally all that money. We're talking tens, if not $100 million, for all this stuff, which is as I said, kind of dubious reliability. That's being generous, I think.
Yeah, and so the left is willing to rest. They have a ground game, and so part of my angst with my friends on the right is that they need to invest in people, particularly low-income people, who share the values of this nation: love of God, love of neighbor, and love of country. That all of the essays and that we published are based on those fundamental foundational principles. Yeah, we've gotten support, but not nearly the kind of outpouring of support. If you really want to challenge the left, what you must do, I believe, is not just mount an intellectual to it, that practice, it seems to me, experience will always trump an argument. Mm-hmm. And a witness is more powerful than an advocate. And so what we try to do in our essays is tell true American history. 20 people who were born slaves who died millionaires. Where else on the planet would this happen?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's right. And I think I agree entirely with you that is the direction to go. I mean, I'm talking about Assata Shakur dying in Cuba, which she escaped to prison in New Jersey and then fled to a prison in Latin America. I think there's you see all these radicals in Cuba that we're desperate, we'd love to come back home to this horrible America with 3 Ks. Well, yeah, not bad by comparison to places like Cuba. But what do you think about, the right now and these fissures on the right? I mean, in the 1990s, you very famously with the great Glenn Lowry, left AEI because of Dinesh D'Souza's book, and my own opinion, somebody who's become quite a crank in recent years. But there are these kind of weird fissures on the right where the conservative movement of William F. Buckley and Tom Sowell and people like that, and I sometimes don't recognize it. When you look at the modern conservative movement, especially vis-a-vis the issue of race, does it worry you? Are you happy about it? What's your general kind of take on things?
One of the things that attracted me to the conservative movement was what Dr. King said: the highest form of maturity is the ability to be self-critical.
Mhm.
And the conservative movement, to me, was composed of people who were willing to be self-critical. I remember when John Tower was advanced as the Secretary of Defense, and Paul Weyrich,
Mhm.
one of the founders of Heritage, challenged and testified against him because of certain personal failings. And he was just vilified by the conservative movement. I said, that's where I want to be, because there's vigorous debate. Michael Novak, Peter Berger, and others. I came to AEI for 5 years. And just for about a 5-year period, conservatives were waking up to mediating institutions that these civic organizations that the Woodson Center supports was the centerpiece. And Michael Novak said this, and no one listened. The political movement that embraces mediating structures will have political power well into the future. Well, conservatives, starting with Ronald Reagan, flirted with it for a time, but then they just sort of pushed it off to the side as sort of being 1,000 points of light or conservative voluntarism.
Yeah.
But throughout the years, rather than conservatives going and working with these local civic institutions and studying their success, you got the rise of the Charles Murrays, Robert Rector, and all of them. And what are they writing about? They write about the pathology of the poor.
Yeah.
They're failure studies. And so conservatives are only talking about restricting poor people, food stamps, work for food stamps. I believe in all of that. You should have incentives for people to be independent. But you can't stop there, and conservatives did. The few people, Fred Siegel was one of those, and a few other people at Manhattan Institute. But if you go look in the books that are written on poverty from conservatives, it's all pathology. It's documenting the pathology, and it's all restrictions. Yeah. Rather than writing about those who achieved against the odds, the people that are profiled in the books that we are writing at the Woodson Center, conservative scholars have ignored this whole body of research that shows how people prospered in the face of oppression. And if they would be in a different place right now if they had concentrate on not just talking about the pathology of the poor, but talk about the strengths of people who achieved in this great republic of ours in the presence of oppression.
And I want to say R.I.P. to the great Fred Siegel, who we lost last year, and was a really smart, interesting guy, and like many of the people of his era, came from the left. He was in that kind of model of people that left the left and became what we used to call neocons, which is now just a different kind of slur. But neoconservatism in its original form was mostly about domestic economic policy and policy towards the poor, which people tend to forget about now. Before we continue, I want to go to somebody out there in two-way land. Lucas, who has been patiently with his hand up, has a question either of me or Robert Woodson. He's smarter than me, so choose wisely. But Lucas, you there?
Yeah. Hey, Michael. Always love to say hello. I'm from that terrible place that you mentioned earlier, Chicago.
Oh, sorry about that.
CTU.
No, but by the way, it's a great place. You have a terrible teachers union. You have a terrible mayor, but it's a lovely city. So,
yeah,
in defense of Chicago, yeah.
I guess the two questions I had on this topic is you briefly had mentioned that you read the transcripts of the trial and that there's a lot of purposeful, misguided, things being said by people to try and push their innocence as far as violence and stuff. But also more on top of that, who were the individuals or the groups that worked their asses off to pacify this person's image to the point that everyone in the media just kind of walking with it, with the exception of, oddly enough, the New Jersey governor. And, Phil Murphy is an absolute idiot, but surprised he got one thing right.
And Dr. Woodson could talk about this too, as somebody who was there at the time. I mean, when Joanne Chesimard and her compatriots killed and wounded one policeman I was not yet born. I had about 2 years to go until I was born. But as I was 74, it was 1 year, I was 73. But to that point, yeah, I mean, there is a pretty impressive academic superstructure that what radicalized me when I was younger in college was seeing all this stuff about Free Mumia Abu-Jamal. Mumia Abu-Jamal was a Black Panther. He killed a cop in the most obvious way. There's literally no debate about this. There's all sorts of bizarre conspiracy theories, but he was found on the ground himself, having been shot by the police officer with the gun, with a spent cartridge, and a dead cop next to him. And there was this Free Mumia stuff all over campus. It seeped into the classroom. There were books related to it. The Assata Shakur memoir was on the syllabi everywhere. So, I mean, in that sense, it was the universities where all of these people, it's like, Dr. Woodson's side of the argument won. But in the universities, the losers were writing the narrative, and the Panthers were I wrote a piece a long time ago. It's the one that I always cite because it's what I'm proudest of for the Daily Beast, about a PBS documentary about the Panthers. And one of the things that no one had ever done was I went through all the Panther Party newspapers. I read almost every one. It was a grueling and very, very difficult week of my life. In realizing that there was, I'm not even joking about this, you can see it in my piece, celebrating Joseph Stalin, celebrating North Korea as a model, saying, it's not just destroy capitalism. There are great examples. It's Mao, who had just been in the middle of a roiling genocide of his own people. And so all of this stuff is like never, you can find one critical book, like one just properly critical book of the Black Panthers. One, you can find, I'm not even joking, 50, 60, 100 books that are laudatory. One by a Black journalist named Hugh Pearson, who very unfortunately took his life a number of years ago. And I'm sure, like Dr. Woodson was, and like my co-host of the other show that I do, Camille Foster, regularly called an Uncle Tom and a sellout and all this stuff. And I have no idea if that precipitated the mental health issues he had, but it couldn't have helped because they denounced that book. But that's a terrific book. But I would say to Dr. Woodson is that why do you think, to that point, to Lucas's point, why do you think that narrative has been so difficult to get across, considering we're not talking about people who had bad ideas? If you want to say Charlie Kirk had bad ideas, fine. We can debate. That's what we like doing. But people who had a murderous rage and acted on that rage and actually took people's lives. I mean, to Lucas's question is that how is it that narrative just doesn't penetrate the mainstream? And before you came on, I was reading the headlines, the Assata Shakur headlines, revolutionary dead, Black activist dead. She was convicted of murder. You would think that would be in the headline.
But some of this nihilism, racism among the Black middle class exists today.
Yeah.
If you look at in 2020, the National Museum of African American History on their website published a chart that said aspects and assumptions of whiteness in the United States. And on this chart, they listed characteristics of whiteness: hard work, self-reliance, nuclear family, belief in one God, delayed gratification, objective linear thinking. After there was a reaction to it, man, they withdrew it in a few days. But Black intellectuals at the Smithsonian published this kind of garbage.
It's pretty racist.
In order to be Black, you have to be not work hard, dependent on other. If a Klansman had published this, it would be considered racist.
Yeah,
but Black middle class people do it. It's called progressive. I
mean, Dr. Woodson, if a Klansman printed that, I'd say, yeah, it makes sense. That's what they think.
Right.
I think it sounds like the overused phrase white supremacy, that white people work hard and Black people do not. I mean, that's absurd in almost every level. But getting to that point, I mean, I can't even, if somebody asked me to trace those kinds of ideas, I don't know that I could, because even the radical ideas, the Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, Eldridge Cleaver stuff, it's just garden variety Marxism mixed with kind of racial nationalism.
Yeah.
How it gets to that, I don't even understand.
But you got to understand, there's a huge divide, particularly in the Black community. I tell people 80% of the people that the Woodson Center serves, we have about 3,500 grassroots groups in 39 states that we serve. There are different racial and ethnic groups. 80% of them, you know, I tell people 80% of my closest friends have letters in front of their names, not behind their names. It's ex-drug addict, ex-predator, ex-something else. And when we come together, racial animus never comes up one time because we're more concerned about strategies of overcoming our brokenness than and if you look at some of the surveys that were done, defund the police. 80% of Black Americans are against defund the police. 60% do not believe racial animus is the most critical problems. But you would never know that if you just read the papers and listen to people on television. Yeah.
I want to recommend to people a book by not a conservative academic in any way, and I'm trying to remember his name, but the name of the book is The Black Silent Majority, and it is a book about crime and policing in the 70s and 80s, and making the general argument that while we have a general view of how Black people view the police from sort of a progressive worldview, is that in those times it was, you know, the Black people living in neighborhoods that wanted the police there, that called the police. They were there because they were getting a lot of calls, and particularly, you know, when it comes to things like the sentencing disparities between powder and crack cocaine. That was a Congressional Black Caucus initiative, and people like Charlie Rangel, who said, you know, look, this crack cocaine is in our neighborhoods and is killing us, and you don't care. And that itself is racist. We need some stiffer sentencing for these drugs that are ripping apart our community. And those narratives are lost. And that's a book that very delicately, in a very scholarly way, not ideological, deals with it. And I recommend people check it out. It's really interesting.
The other thing that we want to emphasize when we talked about the family and Moynihan, talking about the breakup of the family, but our researchers looked at the records of 6 plantations at the end of slavery and found 75% of all Black slave families had a man and a woman raising children. Yeah. The nuclear family was a central part of Black America's survival, and there was a rush to legally marry afterwards. For 100 years, the nuclear family was a dominant force in the Black community. And in fact, in a study between 1930 and 1940, during the Great Depression, when racism was enshrined in law, the Black family, the Blacks had the highest marriage rate of any other group in society.
Yeah. And it's
we closed the education gap in the South between 1920 and 1940 because of the 5,000 Rosenwald Booker T schools. Yeah. From 8 years, I mean, from 3 years to 6 months. So if we close the gap, we have 5 Black high schools in the North, in New York, Baltimore, Washington, Atlanta, and New Orleans. Use textbooks, half the budgets of the white schools. Every one of those Black schools out-tested every white school in the city, in those cities. Yeah. If we were able to achieve these gains in the presence of the jury segregation, why are less than 3 to 5% of children in schools today controlled by Black officials can't read at grade level? So you can't say that racism is responsible for the challenges of the inner city. But racism prevents us from raising the question, if racism were the issue, why are low-income Blacks for the past 50 years failing in cities run by their own people?
Yeah, we're talking about Chicago. Yeah, and
Chicago.
Yeah,
the Bronzeville section of Chicago in our research back in 1919 had 731 Black-owned businesses, 100 million in real estate assets in 1919, and only 12% out of wedlock birth. So
yeah, I mean,
these are important facts.
Yeah. Yeah, forgotten about facts. I mean, we have almost no time left, so I'm going to go to Paul, who has a question. And if Paul, you can keep it quick, that would be great. And we'll end.
Yeah, I'll take it real quick. I just wanted to say, Mr. Woodson, you're a goddamn American hero. My God, I want to say, I just wanted to ask, what is one thing that's like lost to history in that whole like civil rights? You know, we see it through this perspective. I just like to hear your perspective on something that is lost to that moment in time, and something you could say about that. I don't know.
Thank you, Paul. And by the way, I will say, Dr. Wilson just gave you a good bunch
No,
of
no,
stuff.
that's a no, that's a fair
I mean,
point.
but we want more from him
Yeah,
because
no, exactly.
he owes you a response because Dr. Wilson, Paul did just call you an American hero. So, American hero, go ahead. How would you answer that question?
Well, again, we need to. People are motivated to change when they're shown victories that are possible, not injuries to be avoided. Hmm. And there are a lot of historic gains we have made in the face of oppression.
Yeah, that's your research, and there's a lot of great books on this. I mean, some that I think are flawed in some ways and good. I mean, Stephen and Abigail Thornstrom's book, American Black and White, which I had a sort of mixed thing on, but there was some great stuff about how various Black communities performed of times of intense and government codified oppression, not stuff that we think someone looked at us the wrong way, but it was actually enshrined in the books. Bob Woodson from the Woodson Center, look up his stuff. His response to the 1776 project, isn't that what it's called? Is that right?
1776 Unites.
Okay, there you go. Well, you can look that up, and we thank him.
Woodson.org.
It's yeah. Well, the website. Go to Google. You get all his other stuff too. Just Google him. Spend a night with Bob Woodson, as we just did, and read all of his stuff. Bob, thank you so much for being here. We greatly appreciate it. And I'm made a fool of because you're 88 and smarter than all of us. So thanks for that. And the rest of you, we'll be back on Thursday. And tonight was a bit of a history episode. I started with a bunch of history stuff. I will be doing another history episode, and this one is about the atomic bomb. And it's myself talking to the scholar Richard B. Frank, who wrote the book Downfall and is one of the great scholars of the period. And it is very, very smart and very interesting. And there's a lot of people that have a lot of questions about it. It's come up in the political conversation a lot. I mean, by the way, not just on the anniversary in early August, but it's come up a lot about America's past and our decisions, whether they were moral or not. So that'll be on Thursday. If you go over to the Moynihan Report on YouTube, you can subscribe and we will notify you of all this stuff, and you can watch all the good clips. Just rewatch this episode. Watch it 10 times. Send it to your family, and we'll see you on Thursday. Bye.